Scott Kupor, who is an American businessman and author and was sworn in as the director of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management on July 14, 2025. Director Kupor leads the Trump administration's efforts to build a high-performing, accountable, and mission-driven workforce. Prior to joining the administration, he served as a managing partner at Andreessen Horowitz, a venture capital firm he helped build. He has nearly 3 decades of executive leadership, and we're very fortunate to have him here with us today. This conference includes a lot of public servants, and we're talking about public service. I just want to start with the question of, what do you think about public servants and the value of public service?
First of all, thank you for having me here. I appreciate it. And this is a fantastic and beautiful venue to be here. The only thing I could say in this room would be, of course, that we highly value public service, but in all seriousness, it's true. As you well know, this country ultimately was built on this, and I think we've gone through periods of time where some points public service comes in and out of favor. What I hope that we do, obviously at OPM here, is to kind of reignite the concept of public service, particularly among kind of early career folks, because I think that's a big area we're lacking. But certainly, I think there's a lot to be done. And the value of public servants is, without a doubt, unquestioned.
You wrote a right-sizing with purpose memo where you outlined a bold approach towards modernizing the federal workforce. Can you talk a little bit about what was in that memo, what you were trying to accomplish, and then how are you able to make that in practice?
I think there's a couple things that I was trying to articulate in that memo. Number one is we've lived in an era, certainly going back at least kind of 50 years now, where we've generally just basically been of the mind that we can continue to spend money, we continue to kind of add to the things that we do. And while that would be beautiful in a perfect world, that's not the world we live in. And so kind of one of the priorities that I see in government is we have to really come back to the core mission and figure out what are the critical things that we think we need to do and what are the things that are potentially nice to have, but potentially just may not be affordable, obviously, or not affordable in the current way that we're delivering those services. So I think a huge opportunity for government is we have to transform the way we think about organizational structure. We've got to transform the way we think about technology. We have to get out of this general kind of one-size-fits-all solution where more headcount tends to be kind of the default answer for how we solve new problems. And I do think also, it means also prioritization is a really important part of what I think government should do. So one of the things I've observed since I've been here in my short time is we tend to add things to the plate, but we never actually go back and figure out, are there things that potentially should come off the plate, either because they were good ideas at one point in time that no longer make sense, or the honest answer is we just don't have the resources or the prioritization to be able to handle them. So a lot of kind of what we're trying to do is what I would call institutionalize the concept of efficiency. And efficiency to me doesn't mean just cutting. Efficiency means can you deliver a better service, but also be mindful of the fact that ultimately we are stewards of taxpayer dollars. And I think in doing so, we've got to constantly push ourselves and think about, can we deliver the services in a good way, but do that in a way that actually doesn't ultimately bankrupt the country?
Can you outline your and the Trump administration's priorities for us, at least from the OPM perspective?
Yeah, there's kind of 3 big things that we're trying to do at OPM. Number one is what I would call institutionalize the concept of operational efficiency, as I mentioned. Obviously, there's been some, headcount changes in the government over the course of the first 9 months. But these things are not one-time changes. The whole idea now is we've got to create a culture where people think of themselves where operational efficiency is actually a first-class citizen for government. And again, that doesn't mean just like look for things to cut, but it does mean, are we doing things in a smart way? Are we appropriately staffed? Are we utilizing technology in a way that allows us to do things? Do the organizational structures make sense? All those things need to be part and parcel of that. And if you look at kind of one of the things we're doing now, for the first time ever, we will be doing kind of broad headcount planning at the centralized level in government. So we'll be able to, in conjunction with our partners at OMB, be able to look at kind of what are the priorities that are happening across government, and do we think those are ultimately the highest and best, uses of taxpayer dollars. The second big thing that we are doing is looking for ways to change the overall kind of performance culture within government. Your audience probably knows this very well, but it is extremely difficult to hire people based on merit standards in government. It is extremely difficult to actually get rid of underperformers in government. It's very difficult to actually have a performance management standard where you don't have, in our case, 80% of people being ranked, above average in the way the performance culture works. And in my mind, that just doesn't lead to a high performance culture. having spent a lot of time managing people for a long period of time, my sense is people want to be in an environment where they can learn, they have managers that care about their development, they want to be challenged, they want to be held accountable, and they also want to know that if they do a good job, that also they can be recognized for that work. Today, we have a performance management system that in my mind is just broken, where we don't actually adequately distinguish between individuals' performance. And I think, from my perspective, that doesn't enable people to do their best work. The third big area that we're focused on is we know that AI and technology is going to be a tremendous driver of the economy and for work product going forward. And OPM, as kind of the centralized talent management organization in government, has the ability to really drive that change within government. So you'll see us launch here very shortly a number of initiatives that will be designed to figure out how do we get more technology expertise in the government. How do we look for ways to kind of drive kind of centralized hiring for roles that are kind of broadly distributed across organizations? And again, I think if we can do that in a new world, we'll have a much more kind of systematized way of hiring people in all facets of government, and do it in a way that's consistent, that's merit-based, and then that actually is a much more efficient process than the kind of one-off processes that we have today in government.
Let's move beyond headcount. Let's talk about characteristics. What type of workforce are you looking to bring into the federal government? What type of characteristics or traits do they have? What skills are you valuing, and what skills do you want them to have?
Yeah, so let's talk first just high-level demographics, which some of you may know, but we have a generational challenge in government, which is about 44% of the government workforce is over the age of 50 today. If you look in the non-federal workforce, it's about 33% of what the non-federal workforce is. If you look on the other end, we also have a problem with bringing in earlier career people into government. So about 7% of federal workers today are under the age of 30. That compares to about 23% of the non-federal workforce. So if you just think about the shape of what we have a huge amount of very experienced people who are likely to retire, in the next 5 to 10 years, and we're not doing anything in terms of replacing that with early career talent. So that's kind of thing number one. I think we have to just recognize, and we've got to do a better job on. Obviously, organizations like yourselves are critical to this, but we have to figure out a way to actually get early career people to think about government as a important part of their development process. The second thing in terms of skills, it really depends on kind of it depends on the agencies. But what I've found in government is there are many jobs that exist in agencies, but that from a skills perspective are very consistent. So I'll give you an example. We hire a ton of what I would call program managers across government. We hire a bunch of engineers across government. We hire a bunch of entry-level HR, financial analysts, which is great. All of those people, though, have skills that can be applied consistently across government, and then maybe there is something that is specific to the agency that they may want as a kind of plus factor. I think we can do a much better job of making the experience for an applicant very, very simple and allow them to not have to know there are 50 different jobs in government that all have the program management title, but let's go approach and attract people based on a skill set description. Let's go do the validation of their kind of merit-based skills there. Then we can basically, in the back end, introduce them to, great, here's a opportunity for you at Department of State. Here's an opportunity for you at HHS and others. We've got to streamline that process where we have kind of jobs that are actually quantifiable and that exist across government, and centralized recruiting, centralized kind of the creation of certificates in a way that will, I think dramatically change the efficiency of the process, but also make it a much better experience for those who are involved.
How do you think about recruitment? Right now, federal service can be seen as a place where you can accomplish a lot. Many of us in the room would know that, but not everyone in our country might see it that way. So how are you thinking about recruitment, and what is OPM doing to help in that regard?
Yeah, this is where I would say we've done a terrible job of marketing and telling the narrative around what I think the value of public service is. So I'll give you a little anecdote. When I first came, on my very first day, I did an all-hands meeting with the team, and one of the careers pulled me aside afterwards, and she said, hey, you guys are ruining things here in government. And I said, well, what do you mean? Tell me more. She said, well, we basically kind of had promised people the concept of lifetime employment, and that was basically kind of what the recruiting message was for us to bring people into government. And I said to her, I'm going to be straight with you. You're not going to like my answer. But I said, first of all, I just think that's a lie and that's a myth. So if somebody has told you kind of that, kind of lifetime employment exists, I just don't think that's true. That's not the world we live in. It's certainly not the world in the private sector. And, maybe it exists to a certain extent in government, but the reality is times change, financial requirements change. And so I said, look, that just, doesn't make any sense to me. And I said, more importantly, to me, that's a terrible message, right? I don't think that's what people want, at least is my own impression, having spent 30 years managing people. As I said, I think people want to be in an environment where they can do their best work. They're surrounded by smart people. They can be challenged. They're going to be held accountable. They feel like they have career development opportunities. Someone's looking out for them. And I think the message that we want to do from a marketing perspective in government is to say, look, you can do all those things, which require some of the changes that we've been talking about, and you can solve some of the biggest problems at a scale that you can't get anywhere in the private sector. And of course, you obviously can fulfill whatever mission you may have around public service. And then, oh, by the way, to me, the other big part of that is I think we need to dispel the myth that you have to kind of devote yourself at the age of 21 to a 40-year, career as a civil servant, or you have to kind of, go through the other door and devote yourself to a 40-year career in the private sector. I think one of the things we've done a really poor job on is embracing people having evolving career opportunities that encompass both private sector and public sector. And so that's another area where I think OPM can help here, and we can roll out some programs, hopefully, that demonstrate the value of the work that you do in government is recognized by the private sector, such that if you choose to go down that path, you can actually do all these great things in public service, but then also decide, those skills are highly valued by the private sector. And if that's what you want to do, that's great. Then go to the private sector. But I think we need to kind of eliminate this dichotomy that, you're making a left turn or a right turn. And, the world in my mind is just not linear like that. I think the world is much more complicated, and the government needs to evolve in that respect as well.
You've done a great job outlining different opportunities and different ways to view public service. I mean, there's certainly those who want to serve, and in government, there are many opportunities to do things. And they may want to have a career that's 30, 40, 50 years. And you would certainly be encouraging of that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, look, people should do whatever it is they want to do. I think sometimes we interpret what we see from people, and then we create an institutional framework around it. And to me, the driver needs to be, what do you as an individual want to accomplish in your life? And I think, look, that's wonderful. If you want to be a permanent civil service, God bless you. I think that's a fantastic approach to take. But I think we shouldn't design a system around that. I think we should design a system around how do we create an environment where people can actually do their best work, they can accomplish the goals that they were intended to do. They get excited about it. If they do well, they get promoted. If they don't do well, they're held accountable. Those are the kind of intransigent things in my mind that we have to fix. And then then it's a beautiful opportunity for anybody to say, great, I can go to the public sector and do this. I can go to the private sector and do this. I can spend 2 years here. I can spend 2 years there. The institutional systems need to be able to accommodate, I think, what the individual interests are. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes we create kind of hard lines around the institution that basically make it very rigid and, unfortunately, sometimes unattractive to a broad segment of the population.
How are you thinking about building expertise? Because sometimes it takes quite some time to learn government systems or very technical things. How are you thinking about that? And then how are you thinking about incorporating technology that may or may not make that easier?
There's no question that, yes, there are some areas that are highly technical that, probably, in 2 or 3 years, you probably will never get up to speed on. And look, that's just, I think, the reality of the world. That's true in the private sector as well, by the way. There are very specialized areas where that's true. On the other hand, I'm a big believer that, look, if you hire smart, capable people, most people are pretty good at being able to adapt to new circumstances and figure things out. So, I don't want to overstate the case, but I would say sometimes I think we use that as a crutch where we say, hey, you must have X number of years of tenure before you're ready for the next thing. I think the reality is, particularly in a world where people can self-educate through, AI technologies and learn new domains very, very quickly, I think this idea that people can't actually, with the right foundational skill set, be able to adapt to different environments and learn complex systems, I think that's a little bit of an anachronism, quite frankly. In terms of technology, look, I come from the technology world, as you know, and by all means, look, technology is not the panacea for anything nor everything, for sure. But I think the way to think about technology is, does it help people do their jobs more effectively? Does it help them do it also more efficiently? And that's the world we have been living in. There's no question that world is going to get supercharged with the introduction of AI. And I think the thing that government has to do is not be the last dinosaur, basically. And we can't wake up 5 years from now and 10 years from now and find that the entire private sector and or other sovereign governments have figured out a way to make AI a first-class citizen in how they deliver services to the American people. If we do that, look, there's no amount of organizational structure or marketing or anything else that's going to save us. I just think we have to be willing to embrace these things. It doesn't mean we should all go build 2040 AI plans, because the reality is none of us has any idea what the world's going to look like in 2040. But we can do, and what we're trying to do at OPM and in other parts of government, is just say, great, introduce people to these technologies, take one process that you do in your job today and figure out, can you do it 5% better or 10% better by incorporating technology into your practice? I think that's the only way to actually get technology inculcated in an organization, particularly one that it's not that it's been hostile to in the federal government, but look, we know that risk-taking generally has not been a, kind of strong suit of government, quite frankly. And we've got to push people to go a little bit out on the risk curve to be able to be willing to kind of adopt new technologies. If we don't, quite frankly, we're not doing any service to the American people, and we're certainly not doing any service to the employees who are in the government today, because if we keep our heads down, the pace of technology is not going to slow down, basically. So the question is whether we properly equip these employees to be able to adapt to what will be a very changing environment. If not, the honest answer is all of us will be obsolete, and we'll have to bring in all new people, and that doesn't serve anybody.
Leadership is core to everything that I think we do. And I remember before you were confirmed, I reached out and we had several conversations. And since you've been confirmed, you've been incredibly responsive on phone, on email, which surprised me given the great task you have ahead of you. I think of that as a mark of leadership. You've also worked in the private sector. So what are some of the lessons that you've learned from working in the private sector? What are some of the lessons you've learned since your time as the confirmed director? And how do you think about leadership? And what is your leadership style?
I think the role of any leader is you have to be able to tell a story, and I don't mean make up a story, but you have to be able to find a way to get people to follow you. In my prior job, right, we back two people in a garage trying to change the world, basically. What changes successful companies from unsuccessful companies in that world is, can you convince rational people to do irrational things, basically? So can you convince me to quit my job when I was at Andreessen Horowitz to come join your startup company, even though we know the chances of success are incredibly small and the likelihood is you're going to fail? Like, that's an irrational thing to do to a certain extent. But people do irrational things when they believe in the mission and when they want to follow the person. Great leaders, in my mind, are effectively, evangelicals in many respects. They're trying to convince people why their path makes sense, and they're trying to get people to come along for the ride well before the time of rationality. So I think the government can learn a lot from the private sector in terms of leadership. Is all of us who are in leadership roles in government have got to be able to tell that story. What is it that's so compelling about coming to work for government? What are the big challenges that we're trying to address? Why is this a place where you can achieve your career goals? Historically, you have to go back to literally kind of Kennedy in the space race, I think, before you have that type of leadership. I think we have to figure out a way to get that back into our vernacular in government, right? There's way too much concepts of bureaucracy and of doing, things the same way. We've got to give people the freedom and the leadership, the ability to actually lead in a way that, in some cases may involve some measure of risk, not the kind of crazy risk that, I took in my prior job, but measured risk where we actually balance what is the downside relative to what we think the upside of doing things. So to me, I think that's the most critical thing that we have to do in government, is we've got to give people permission to actually do something that is not kind of the way we did it for the last 5 or 10 years just because of historical precedent, but to rethink and start from, first principles. So that's the most important thing. And then look, I think the thing that I've learned that I hope also to bring to government is organizations are all the same in my mind, no matter whether you're in the government, whether you're in a nonprofit, or whether you're in the private sector. Organizations are basically collections of individuals. And individuals, whether we like it or not, we respond to incentives. That's basically the way kind of our human brain is wired. And so whenever you kind of ask yourself, like, why is an organization doing something? I think you have to go back to fundamental first principles, which is, what incentives have we created for the individuals who are part of that organization? And have we created the right incentives, or have we created the wrong incentives? And again, we can debate that the objectives are different, right? There's no question the objectives of what the federal government does is different than what the profit-seeking objectives are of the private sector. But I think what we can't ignore is the basic organizational dynamic, which is the behavior we want is going to derive from the incentives that we create for people to do. And part of, again, what I think we can do at OPM, and I hope we can do across government, is to relook at whether we have the right incentives to drive the kind of behavior we want. And again, to me, some modicum of risk-taking is part of that. And I use the word modicum very carefully because, again, we can't take incredible risk in things like making sure that, the country is safe, or making sure that people get their Social Security checks. But the vast majority of things we do are not at that level of kind of seriousness. And there is an opportunity, I think, to kind of change the mindset and give people the freedom to fail in a small way sometimes in order to actually achieve something that has much greater upside if we also account for that risk. So those are, I think, the things that I hope to bring more broadly to the organizational culture.
That's great. And it's worth saying that leadership can also be convincing irrational people or people with irrational ideas to do rational things.
Absolutely.
So, Well, and with that, let me turn to our audience here and our participants and see, and there are already many hands up, and see if there are questions that you'd like to ask.
Hi, thank you so much for your remarks. I think all of us are interested in having insight into the decisions that OPM is making right now. Speaking from personal experience, during my graduate career, I worked at 3 different congressionally chartered organizations that provided internships and hiring pathways and pipelines for young people to enter government. And as those organizations are no longer able to provide those opportunities, I'm curious how you plan to bring more young people into government and to adjust the demographic that you brought up at the beginning of your discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. The short answer is we have got to fix and redress that issue, basically. So I think what you're going to see from us at OPM is a rethinking or a redoubling down, maybe is the better way to say it, of programs that are designed to basically kind of help people from either high school or college level programs into government, and also, quite frankly, try to tap into other early career people who may already be in the private sector but who are interested in the public sector. So you're absolutely right, which is we've let some of these programs kind of die on the vine, quite frankly. We've never kind of launched them. We've never marketed them in a way that makes sense. We have to fix that because there's no way to me, the biggest challenge that we have for the next 30 years is if we don't solve this early career problem, or, I've been using under 30 as a euphemism, which is not probably the smartest thing to do, but let's call it early career. We've got way bigger problems than we can even anticipate because we're not going to have a workforce that's actually going to be interested in doing the work we're doing. So you're absolutely right. I think we've underfunded these things. We've undermarketed them. We've under-program managed them, whatever the right words are. And I think you're going to see, a lot of activity, certainly from OPM, to try and address that.
Thank you, Mr. Director. It's a pleasure to hear a lot of the initiatives that you're laying out. As actually, it's some themes we've been talking about today. I wanted to ask you a question about what happened predating you. Yeah. This room is very tied in and watching the news and have their ears to the ground as it relates to DOGE and the activities therein. Some of the pronouncements of the director of OMB about the value of public service has some of us concerned about attracting people to serve it with you. We saw cuts to the provisionary service. So the younger generations, we've just purged a good batch of young people from public service. And it seems to me that many of the things you're saying are building that back in, building capacity stronger, I suppose. What's OPM doing in the way of tracking the impacts, providing data to those of us, for example, in the academic community to better understand how these cuts have impacted service delivery and the capacity of a government to deliver for the American people? And are there some ways that we can be partnering with the research community to provide you with useful data to help to restore some capacity in the manners that you've been laying out here today?
Let me give you a couple of thoughts on this. So I think everyone knows this, but let me just put into context some of the changes that have happened in headcount. By the way, just your question about data, we're about to launch a much better and improved FedScope. I don't know the exact date of that yet, but it's imminent. So number one, that's been, quite frankly, sorely lacking. And it was a big project that we're working on. So I think hopefully some of this stuff will be much more transparent. But just to give you the kind of rough lay of the land, basically, right? We started the year with roughly about 2.4 million federal civilian employees. We have forecast that we will likely end the year around 2.1 million federal employees. So a delta net of about 300,000, which basically is kind of 45 to 50,000 of new hires offset by departures on the other side. To your point on probationers, I've said this publicly, but it's important to say it in this group. We removed a total of about 6,000 probationary employees out of a 2.4 million employee base. Now, I don't want to take any headcount reductions lightly, but if you look at the overall exits from government, basically 90+% of the exits from government were DRP related, voluntary retirement, or people just, natural attrition. So that's not, again, to make light of any of that. But I think it's important that you understand at least the nature of kind of the headcount. And look, in the perfect world, we would have a much more fluid way to actually address performance in federal government. My personal view today is the performance management system is completely broken. It's very, very difficult, as many of you probably know, to actually remove people who are not performing at the level we'd like. In the future, what I would much rather us see is figure out a way to actually address the core problem, which is, can we have a high-performing, culture by also being able to address the underperformance problem? All that being said, and I've said this publicly before, there's no question, as happens in any time you do a restructuring, that there are probably areas in any organization where people look today and they say, gee, we got rid of X number of people. It turns out, that impacts some core service delivery. We need to now add back. One of the things that you may have seen recently is there's an executive order that the president put out about, I guess, 2 weeks ago now, talking about kind of what happens in terms of hiring on a go-forward basis. For those of you who didn't see it, as you may know, for most of this year, we were under basically a 4-to-1 kind of hiring environment, meaning that the president's direction was for every single hire, you must remove 4 people from government. Okay, so that was basically what we were operating under in the DOGE era. That extended through to October 15th. The president just came out with an EO, as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, that's now directing OPM and OMB to basically partner together to review headcount plans with all the agency heads. And once they do that and establish an annual headcount plan, they will then have the ability to hire without regard to that 4-to-1 policy anymore. So the way I would describe at least what we're going to try to do, and I think what the president's agenda is, look, we want to create an environment where we're focused on all the things that we think we need to do, both statutorily as well as obviously the agenda the president has. To do that, there's no doubt in my mind that there will probably be growth in headcount in order to fund some of those areas. At the same time, again, by eliminating this 4-to-1 ratio, that doesn't mean that we don't believe that there will be opportunities potentially to relook at organizational structure and other things. But there is no longer any kind of, targets associated with that. And those will just be decisions that are led, obviously, by the agency heads, with kind of direction from OMB and OPM.
I want to ask you one final question, if we can. Next year, the National Academy of Public Administration will celebrate its 60th anniversary, and our country will obviously celebrate the 250th. We are in the middle of launching, and this is the start of it, an initiative called Celebrating the American Public Servant, and we'll do that next year, and we're hoping to be able to invite you, and you can come and celebrate with us. If that were to happen in next year, could you tell us what would you have expected to change from now and then, and how can the National Academy of Public Administration work with you and this administration to help achieve goals in a constructive, positive, and respectful way?
Yeah, so I think a couple things. One would be, as I mentioned, we have got to tell the compelling story about why public service and public administration matters to ordinary people in this country. And so I hope, and I certainly am going to do my best to kind of try to reframe the conversation here and make sure that we're talking about it. Two is, what would make me very happy is, do we have what I would define as a high-performance culture in the federal government? So do we have a system that allows for accountability on one end and also allows for rapid promotion, elimination of tenure requirements in jobs in order for people to get promoted? I would love to fix kind of these 12-month limitations that we have on kind of moving people through the step ladder and things of that sort. To me, those are all artificial barriers that don't allow people who are truly excelling to be able to be paid and recognized at the level they should be. So that's something that we're going to work on. The things that require legislative action, unfortunately, I'm less positive that we'll be able to get through, but I think there is a lot that we can do from a regulatory perspective. But look, my real hope would be, if we're sitting here July 4th of next year, that we have made a dent in the ability for, particularly early career people to see that being in government actually can add tremendous value to the country and add tremendous value to their career development opportunities. And if we did that, then look, I think the world is incredibly bright. And if we fail to do that, quite frankly, look, I think we're going to kind of, be in a very, very difficult situation.
Well, it's very clear that you're mission driven and that you have a leadership style that will help us achieve a workforce of a high quality and a high performance. I want to thank you for your time, and I want to leave you with one last comment. You clearly stated that public service is something of value, something that you value, something that the administration values. You are looking at experts in the field and those that have dedicated their lives and careers to that. You're also looking at partners who want to work with you and the administration to help to the greatest extent possible. So thank you so much, Director, for joining us, and please thank him for Management Matters is a presentation of the National Academy of Public Administration, produced by Lizzie Alwan and Matt Hampton, and edited by Matt Hampton.